Brandon here with Berserker Off-Road. So I have a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old, and over the years I've learned a few things from taking them on family adventure trips. And I want to share that information with you, especially those of you that are just starting out. I've learned some things over the years that would have really helped me out to make those trips a lot more enjoyable for my kids. Ultimately, so that they want to keep coming out there with us, with my wife and I, to keep going on these awesome adventure trips. Now, the first step in planning a family trip is finding the time. Often, my wife and I, we realized that, oh wow, these long weekends, they would sneak up on us. The kids would come home from school on a Wednesday and say, yay, we don't have school till Monday. And it's like, well, man, I wish I'd known that beforehand. That would have been great for us to plan a quick getaway. And one thing that helps with that is going to your kid's school district website and looking for their calendar and print that out. And that'll show you when their planned long weekends are, like those teacher development days or holidays or whatnot. It lets you plan ahead to see when you have that availability. We can plan those quick getaways so you're not trying to cram all your trips into Labor Day or Memorial Day weekend or just over the summer. That really helps, just that initial planning and looking ahead. Since the pandemic, a lot of people are spending more time outside. Whether that's the campgrounds, national parks, a lot of outdoor activities, and a lot of those, they fill up fast. And when you plan ahead, that gives you that extra lead time to book your reservations if you have to, and that is huge. It's a lot harder now to roll up to places, to walk in and book your campsite, or national parks now, some of them have a reservation system, where you have to show up really early in the morning. And if you plan your trips around off-peak season for a lot of these places, it gives you a better opportunity to get in there and experience these things that you otherwise might not have, or they'll be less crowded. Once you've done that, the next thing that I look at is the weather. Is it a trip that we're planning in the fall? Is it in the spring, wintertime? What's the weather like? And that gives me a better idea of the comfort and the capability of my family and what is realistic for us to do. In an example, one spring break, we went out to Moab, Utah to go to Arches National Park, and we thought, oh, it's March, in Utah, we should be fine. But really, it ended up snowing on us, and while it was a little chilly, it ended up being a phenomenal trip because there weren't many people there. In fact, many trails and hikes we did, we were the only ones there. We had some awesome experiences, hiking around like these old cowboy camps, and yeah, it was cold, but because we were prepared for that, it was fine. The kids weren't cold, and they weren't wet or soggy, and they had a happy, fun time. And that's just an example of planning ahead and doing things that might be out of season, but are still enjoyable. If you only have like a 3 or 4 day weekend, then figure out, okay, how much time am I willing to drive to get to these places? When we lived in Kansas City, for example, it was a 5-hour drive for us to go down to Arkansas, for example, to go to places. And so we knew, okay, if we left on a Friday afternoon, we could get down there by evening, have a late dinner, and we'd have Saturday and then most of Sunday to kind of hang out, and then we drive back Sunday evening. But if you have, a couple more days off, then you can plan further drives out with your kids, because you don't want to spend half the time that you have just sitting in the car, just driving to get to where you're trying to go explore. So once you have that radius figured out, and then you go, okay, what are some places we can go that are interesting? And once you pick out, okay, we have a 4-day weekend and we're willing to drive, maybe 6 hours, and within that radius around where we are, there's this national park, or there's these forest roads I want to go explore, or this national forest, things like that. Then the next thing is just start ordering maps. That's what I like to do, is I'll get on to Amazon and start ordering a bunch of National Geographic maps, for example, that really cover the area that we can go. And so then I can spend more time just physically looking at the area. I can look at the terrain, I can look at the features, I can look at, what it's like, what we're getting into. And that helps spark some ideas of things we can do. Other great resources are tourism websites. So, for example, like the state of Colorado, they have a Colorado tourism website. If I'm planning a trip to Colorado, I can go to that website and find all kinds of other activities to do while I'm in the state. and help fine tune some activities like that. At gas stations or some hotels, they'll have these brochures in those like displays that are in the lobbies, and sometimes I have my kids just say, okay, go pick out 4 or 5 things that would be interesting for you to do, and they'll go out there and pick up some of the flyers, and then we might plan that into our trip. And that's something else that you need to keep in mind with these trips is don't plan everything down to the minute. Leave a lot of space for the unknown and the unexpected to happen. The weather could totally change, and if you had planned to go down a bunch of these forest roads and suddenly they're all rained out and too muddy, well now what are you going to do? An example of that is last summer, my family went down to Palo Duro State Park. We were going to go hiking and exploring some of the roads there. And it ended up raining so much that the park closed. The rangers actually shut the gates to the park, and we were just stuck in our campsite. We couldn't go hiking because of the rain. And so we were just in our Oz tent all day. And we, if we had like a smaller backpacking tent or something, we would have been very uncomfortable in there. And so we had that space to hang out. Another thing to keep in mind when you're planning your trips is capabilities. So remember, kids, they're smaller and they are more susceptible to the environment than you are. An example, last summer, my wife and I thought, hey, let's go to southern Utah in June and go see Bryce Canyon and Zion National Park and then hike some slot canyons. And it was a great trip, but one of the things we decided to do was we found this slot canyon, and we decided, hey, it's only a mile from the parking lot to the slot canyon, and the kids will be fine. Yes, it's exposed, but they should be okay. They've done plenty of hikes before. We've hiked them, taken them on 8-mile hikes up and down mountains, and they're tough hikers. And we got there, and right away it was apparent that the heat was really getting to them. They were actually developing heat exhaustion, and it was very irresponsible of my wife and I for doing that, because we wanted to go see a slot canyon and we thought the kids could take it. But your kids, while they are resilient, you still need to be careful, because you don't want them to have such a bad time that they don't want to do it again. Now on that trip, once we got back to the truck, I had some popsicles in the freezer. The kids had those and some Gatorade, and within minutes they had bounced back and they were happy and chipper again. Just because you're seasoned or adapted to something does not mean necessarily that your kids are. So maybe back off on the extremes of the weather or the environments and save those trips for yourself and your buddies, and keep your trips a little more enjoyable for your kids so they'll want to come out and do it again. And also having flexibility and being adaptable to changes in the weather or whatnot on your trips also cuts down on stress. And if your kids, if they see you fighting and arguing and complaining about things because it didn't go as planned, and that gives them a bad impression on the trip. And that might be the only thing they remember from that trip is, oh man, that time we went to South Dakota, all I remember was my parents fighting next to the Jeep. So, planning ahead and being adaptable, that cuts down on the stress, and so you're less likely to be in those predicaments. And so overall, people can have a more enjoyable time. So just keep that in mind. And also on your trips, try to have some perspective. If your kid breaks your camping chair, or if they rip a shirt, or if they lose something, it's okay. All that stuff's replaceable. You and your kids aren't. You show them, how to respond emotionally to things like that when it happens. You can be the better person to set the example. If you're acting like a child yourself, then well, they're going to act like a child too. So keep that in mind. When things aren't going the way you think on your trips. Be the strong parent that your kids think you are, because they're kids. They think you're a superhero. And when you plan this awesome trip, and if something goes wrong and you still save the day, well, then you're an even bigger superhero. And this is your time to shine, okay? And one more last tip is, when you take all these pictures, print them out. Make an album for your kids. Anytime we go on a big trip, we'll print out an album of our favorite pictures and our kids' favorite pictures. And so the kids just have that physical memory of the trip. And then their absolute favorite pictures will print larger sizes to put on their walls, just to show them in their heroic moments of their own adventures. And that lets them remember it too. You don't need to take all these pictures and video and then it just sits on a hard drive somewhere. remember to do something with all of that. And you want to celebrate your kids' adventures with you, and so they remember that. So those are things I've learned over the years, and they've helped ensure that we have a lot of fun on our trips. And I'm still learning. I'm still changing things that we do on our trips and learning to incorporate more activities. And I found what really works is not making off-roading or overlanding the focus of our trips. And yeah, that's tough because I have a YouTube channel about off-roading, but I've learned there are absolutely times I need to just set my camera down and have fun with my family. And those end up being the best trips. And that's why you don't see a lot of that on my YouTube channel, because I've learned to be a better father, I need to be a crappy YouTuber. And my kids have appreciated that. It's not broadcasting their lives on the internet for some ad revenue. It just means that we're able to slow down and be a family on our trips. And there's still a lot more for me to learn, especially as my kids are aging and they're getting older, starting to hit puberty, and they're growing, and it takes more space just to fit them into places, how that changes our camping arrangements. And so a lot of that I need to rethink. And as I learn from those experiences, as the kids grow and get bigger and eat more, then yes, I'll share that with you. But for now, those are things that I've learned over the years for our kids as they're younger, what's led to some very successful, fun, and enjoyable trips. So I'm Brandon with Berserker Off-Road, and I'll see you on the trail.